The last hug he gave me felt like a goodbye, a slow, trembling embrace, warm on the outside but cold beneath the surface. He cried, God. He cried so convincingly that even the immigration officer beside me wiped away a tear. But now I know those weren't tears of sadness. They were relief. He wasn't losing a wife. He was getting rid of a problem. And I was the problem. My name is Ana Claudia Ribeiro. I'm 38 years old, born and raised in a small rural town in Minas Gerais, Brazil, a place where dreams are few and options even fewer. My mother used to scrub hotel bathrooms. My father? He disappeared before I turned 10. My childhood was the smell of bleach, the sound of crying babies, and the constant echo of my mother's warning that a woman needs to be smart with her choices or she'll spend her life scrubbing the floors of men who weren't. I took that seriously. I worked hard. I didn't date much. And when I got older, I set my eyes on what everyone in my town whispered about but never really touched: the American dream. He came into my life through a phone screen. His name was John, handsome, with soft blue eyes and a warm smile. He was everything my small-town life had never shown me. He called me beautiful in every message, said he was looking for someone real, someone who didn't play games. Our video calls turned into all-night conversations. He said his ex-wife was cold, distant. He said I was different. He said I made him feel alive again. And for the first time in my life, I believed someone actually saw me. He came to visit me in Brazil after just 2 months of talking. When I saw him walk through the airport in Belo Horizonte with flowers in hand, I felt like a character in one of those novellas my mother used to watch every afternoon. He was tall, charming, and he looked at me like I was the only woman in the world. For 12 days, we were inseparable. Every morning, he made me coffee. Every night, he held me like he was afraid I'd disappear. On the last day of his trip, he took me to a small restaurant and proposed. He said he couldn't imagine his life without me. I said yes, with tears in my eyes. When I returned to my village, everyone treated me like royalty. I was the girl who had made it, the girl who caught a gringo. My mother cried and kissed my forehead, telling me that I'd finally be safe, that I'd never need to clean anyone's bathroom again. 3 months later, I stood at the airport with a suitcase full of borrowed clothes, a heart full of hope, and a visa that said, fiancé of a U.S. citizen. It was the beginning of a new life, or at least, that's what I thought. He picked me up in a black SUV with heated seats and an American flag air freshener hanging from the rearview mirror. He kissed my forehead and whispered, "Welcome home, my love." The first weeks were like a fairy tale. He showed me off to his friends as his beautiful Brazilian fiancée. He took me to nice restaurants, introduced me to his co-workers, and told everyone how lucky he was. He bought me clothes, told me not to worry about working, and said, "I'll take care of everything. All you need to do is love me." At first, it felt like love, a kind of love I'd only read about in books. But slowly, that love started to rot. Little things, small comments, the way he flinched when I tried to call my mother, how he'd change the subject when I asked to take English classes, how he'd lock his phone the moment I entered the room. But I didn't question it. I thought maybe I was overreacting. I was the foreigner, the guest in his country. Maybe I just didn't understand how things worked here. Then came the restrictions. I wasn't allowed to use social media. He said it was dangerous. I wasn't allowed to go out alone. He said the neighborhood was unsafe. I wasn't allowed to have a job or even open a bank account. "You don't need those things," he'd say. "I'll take care of you." He said all of it with a smile. That same smile I fell in love with. But that smile became a cage. I started to lose pieces of myself, my language, my friends, my identity. The girl from Minas Gerais, who once dreamed of owning a small bakery, who laughed with her cousins on the porch at sunset, she began to fade. There were days I stared out the window and forgot where I was. I stopped calling home. Every time I did, he'd stand nearby, listening. Once, I tried to speak in Portuguese with my sister, and he snapped, "Don't talk in a language I can't understand in my own house." So I stopped speaking it at all. He became my whole world, and that world was getting darker, but I still held on. I told myself it was just culture shock, that every couple had their problems, that once we were officially married, once the baby came, things would get better. Until that day at the airport, he held me, kissed my cheek, told me how much he'd miss me, said everything would be fine. I was being deported for overstaying my visa, a visa that he had promised to help renew, a process he swore he was handling, a lie he told with such calm, I never thought to doubt it. As the immigration officers took me by the arm, I saw him cry, but his phone was already buzzing in his hand. A call. He answered. "Yeah, she's on the way," he said. "It's done. Right then, I knew. He never loved me. I was never his future. I was a costume, a cover story, a disposable character in a script he had written long before I arrived. And just like that, my life, my dream, became evidence in someone else's performance. If this story echoes something inside you, if you've ever felt discarded by someone who once swore they loved you, I invite you to subscribe to this channel. These stories are painful, but they deserve to be told. And if you're watching this far, I want to hear your voice too. Tell me in the comments where you're watching from and write, "My pain matters," because your voice could be the courage someone else needs today. He was everything I had, never seen in a man before. Tall, confident, with a smile that disarmed me instantly. His voice was soft, almost melodic, like the ones you hear in movies when the hero leans in to whisper something that changes everything. John came into my life at a moment when I was tired of waiting, tired of hearing that I was too plain, too poor, too small town for someone to take seriously. And then, from thousands of miles away, he saw me. At least, that's what I believed. We met through Tinder. It sounds funny now, thinking of how something so artificial could feel so real. But back then, it was magic. He wrote in English, of course, and I struggled to respond at first. I had studied the basics in school, learned a few phrases from American shows, but nothing could prepare me for the speed and confidence of a native speaker. Still, he was patient, said my accent was beautiful, said it made me sound exotic, like a song he didn't want to stop listening to. We talked every night, for hours. Sometimes about silly things like favorite foods and movies. Sometimes about heartbreak. He said his ex-wife had left him cold, emotionally unavailable, that he was tired of the games, that American women didn't know how to care for a man anymore. They don't cook, they don't love, he said. Not like you do. I didn't realize it then, but he was already planting seeds, making me feel special by making others seem unworthy. He called me real, said I reminded him of the women from old days, loyal, soft, loving, the kind of woman who stays, and I, desperate for a place to belong, clung to every word like a lifeline. He asked to meet in person after 2 months. I was nervous. What if he didn't like me in real life? What if I wasn't what he imagined? But when he arrived in Brazil, he wrapped me in his arms like we had known each other forever. He smelled like mint gum and leather seats. His hands were warm, steady, and his eyes didn't just look at me. They studied me, as if memorizing every inch of my face. We stayed in a hotel near the beach. For 12 days, it was paradise. He ordered breakfast in bed, walked hand in hand with me down the crowded streets, introducing me to locals in broken Portuguese. He took selfies of us at every meal. Our love story, he said, will show our kids one day. He talked about our future like it was already written. A house in the suburbs, a golden retriever, a quiet life. He said he wanted to take care of me, that I had worked too hard for too long, that he wanted to give me a life where I could breathe. "I'll do everything," he whispered once while brushing my hair back with his fingers. "You'll never have to worry again." On the 9th day, he took me to a little seafood restaurant by the shore. The air smelled of grilled shrimp and ocean wind. There were fairy lights hanging from the ceiling and a soft jazz band playing in the corner. I thought we were just having another romantic dinner, but then he stood up in the middle of the meal, walked to my side of the table and kneeled. He opened a small velvet box with a simple silver ring inside and asked me to marry him. I couldn't breathe. The entire restaurant stopped. People clapped. A waitress wiped away a tear. I remember saying yes, my voice trembling, and then crying so hard I couldn't even finish dessert. He flew back to the United States 2 days later, promised to call as soon as he landed, promised he would start the immigration process right away. And he did. Within weeks, he was sending me documents to sign. I went to the U.S. Embassy for interviews, got my medical checkup, my visa stamped. It all felt like a dream moving too fast to fully grasp. When my visa was finally approved, my mother held my hands and kissed them. "You're going to be safe now," she said. "You're going to be loved the way you always deserved." I remember standing at the gate at Confins Airport with a second-hand suitcase and a folder full of documents pressed to my chest. Everything I had ever known was behind me. Everything I hoped for was ahead. I told myself this was how brave women began again, with faith, with nothing but love. When I landed in the U.S., John was waiting with flowers again. He held a sign with my name, like in the movies. He kissed me on the forehead and told me I looked even more beautiful than he remembered. We drove to his house, a cozy 2-bedroom in a quiet neighborhood with trimmed lawns and waving flags. I had never seen so much order. Everything had a place. including me. He carried me over the threshold like in wedding stories, laughed when I gasped at the size of the fridge, showed me the bed he had decorated with rose petals, told me he had taken a few days off work to help me settle in. And for a while, I believed I had made it, that I was the lucky one. He made pancakes in the morning, wrote love notes on sticky pads and left them on the mirror, took pictures of me cooking dinner and posted them online with captions like, "My perfect wife." He told everyone we were getting married soon, that the papers were just a formality. He said I didn't need to work, that it was better for us if I stayed home, especially while the visa process was finalizing. That way, I'd avoid trouble. He said American immigration was tricky, that if I made a mistake, they could deport me. So I stayed home. I cooked. I cleaned. I waited for him to come back every evening and tell me I was doing great. I learned how to use the dishwasher, how to smile politely when neighbors waved. I was learning a new language, a new culture, and a new set of rules that no one really explained, but everyone expected me to follow. And then, slowly, the compliments turned into corrections. "You don't need to put on makeup every day. We're not going anywhere. Why are you calling your mom so much? You're here now. Don't use Portuguese around me. I can't understand you, and that's rude." I began to shrink, to doubt myself. I told myself it was just adjustment. That culture shock was real, that every couple had rough patches. But something inside me was shifting. I started to feel like a guest in his house, not a partner in our home. And yet, every time I considered leaving, I remembered my mother's words. "You're safe now." But I wasn't. I was slowly disappearing. If you've ever felt your dreams turn into a cage, if you've ever been celebrated one moment and silenced the next, this story is for you. Please consider subscribing to this channel. It helps us share more stories like this, stories that matter, that heal, that awaken. And tell me in the comments, have you ever loved someone so deeply that you ignored the warnings in your gut? Right? I believed him too. You are not alone. It started slowly, like a glass cracking from the inside, invisible at first, until one day the whole thing shatters and you wonder how long it had been breaking without you noticing. In the beginning, I was just trying to adjust. Everything was new. The language, the culture, the sounds of the street, even the way people smiled at grocery stores. I had come from a world of dust roads and simple rules, where kindness often came in silence and hardship was worn like an old sweater. Now I was in a place where houses had alarm systems and strangers said, "How are you?" without waiting for an answer. At first, I was too overwhelmed to notice the limits being placed around me. They felt like comfort, like protection. John told me to stay inside because the neighborhood could be dangerous for someone who didn't speak the language. He said I shouldn't talk to neighbors too much because people might get curious and start asking questions about my immigration status. He installed a camera at the front door, just in case, he said, and he kept the only set of keys. He told me not to get a job, that I should wait until all the papers were done, that immigration would be watching and any mistake could get me deported. So I waited. I cleaned the house until the floors looked like glass. I learned to cook American dishes, then mixed them with Brazilian spices to feel a little closer to home. I smiled when he came home, rubbed his shoulders, asked about his day. I told myself this was love, that love was sacrifice, that patience was part of the deal. He controlled everything, the money, the groceries, the Wi-Fi password. If I needed anything, I had to ask. At first, it felt romantic. He wanted to take care of me. But soon I realized that asking became begging, that love came with conditions, that every request had to be justified. One day I asked if I could send a birthday gift to my niece in Brazil, just a small package. He looked at me like I had asked to buy a car. "Why are you still so connected to that life?" he said. "You're here now. Focus on your new life." I didn't send the gift, and I started to forget the dates of my family's birthdays. Not because I didn't care, but because I stopped being allowed to care. Even my clothes became a problem. I had arrived with just a few outfits, most of them not suited for the cold winters. He bought me new clothes, but only what he approved. "You don't need those tight jeans anymore," he said. "You're a wife now, not a teenager." The clothes were baggy, gray, practical. I looked in the mirror one day and barely recognized myself. I looked like a shadow of the woman I used to be. He started monitoring my phone. He said it was for safety, that if anything happened to me, he needed to know who I spoke to last. He installed an app that tracked my location. I wasn't even leaving the house, but he said it was better to be safe. He created a shared email account and told me to only use that one. He said too many accounts made things complicated. I stopped speaking Portuguese. At first, I'd whisper it on the phone with my mother, but he'd raise his eyebrows and ask, "Why are you hiding things from me?" Then he banned it completely. "This is an English-speaking home," he said. "You're in America now." One day, I tried watching a Brazilian soap opera on my phone with headphones. He pulled them out and said, "Why are you watching that garbage? You should be learning more English instead." I cried that night, silently, in the shower, where the sound of water could cover the sound of my sobs. I didn't want to upset him. I didn't want to seem ungrateful. He had brought me here, given me a home. Wasn't this what I wanted? But I had become invisible. My accent, my music, my culture, my language, all erased, one by one, like chalk off a board. And the more I tried to hold on to pieces of who I was, the more he made me feel like I was wrong for even trying. I remember the day I tried to apply for English classes at the local community center. I found a flyer hidden between grocery coupons. Free ESL classes for immigrants? I was so excited I waited for the right time to ask. When I finally told him, he laughed. "You don't need English classes. You already speak enough. Besides, why would you want to be around a bunch of other immigrants who can barely speak? It'll just make you talk funny." I ripped the flyer into pieces and threw it away. My days became a cycle of silence. Wake up, clean, cook, wait, smile, repeat. The highlight of my day was opening the curtains and watching people walk their dogs, kids ride bikes, old couples hold hands. I wondered what their lives were like, if they argued about groceries, if they controlled each other's phones, if they hugged for real, not for display. John was still charming to everyone else. Our neighbors thought he was the sweetest man. He mowed their lawns, brought cookies on holidays. At church, people would come to me and say, "You're so lucky, he speaks so highly of you." I'd smile and nod, because what else could I do? One afternoon, he came home early. I had burned the rice, a small mistake, nothing dramatic. But he looked at the pot and said, "What the hell is wrong with you? Do you even know how to cook?" It was the first time he raised his voice like that, and the first time I saw the switch in his eyes. The warmth gone, just cold, sharp disappointment. I apologized. He didn't respond, just walked past me and slammed the bedroom door. That night, he didn't eat dinner. He didn't say goodnight, and I didn't sleep. After that, I became obsessed with perfection. The house had to be spotless. The meals had to be flawless. I watched YouTube videos in secret on how to make the perfect roast chicken. I wrote grocery lists on sticky notes and practiced asking for things in English just in case I ever got to go to the store. But I never did. Once, I asked if I could get a job cleaning houses, something small, cash only, just to save a little for myself. He shook his head and said, "No, that's how they catch you. One phone call and you're gone. You want to be sent back." And just like that, the message was clear. My body was in this house. My soul had been left behind. If you're still here, listening, and something in this story feels familiar, if you've ever been loved in a way that made you smaller instead of whole, I want to say this to you. Your voice matters. Please subscribe to this channel so we can share more stories that often go unheard. And if you feel safe, leave a comment below saying, "I see myself here." Because the moment we name what's happening, we take back a piece of what was taken from us. I found out I was pregnant on a rainy Tuesday morning. The kind of rain that taps gently at the window like it's trying to whisper a secret. My body had been giving me hints for days. A wave of nausea here, a sudden craving for chocolate milk in the middle of the night. I had blamed it on stress, on homesickness, on the strange food. But deep down, I knew. Something inside me was growing. A heartbeat that did not belong to me, but was now mine to protect. I waited until John came home to tell him. I had imagined his reaction 100 times. Maybe he would cry. Maybe he would lift me off the ground in joy. I hoped it would bring us closer, that this baby would be a bridge between the silence and the coldness that had crept into our house. He walked in, tired from work, the smell of gasoline still clinging to his clothes. I told him while he was taking off his shoes, "I'm pregnant." Just 2 words, but they seemed to echo through the room like thunder. He didn't speak. He didn't smile. He didn't touch me. He just looked at me for a long time and said, "Are you sure?" I nodded, holding the test like proof that I wasn't making it up. He walked past me, straight to the fridge, opened a beer, and sat on the couch. That night, he slept in the guest room. The next morning, he acted like nothing had happened, made coffee, scrolled through his phone, talked about the news. I wanted to scream, to ask what he was thinking, but the fear in my chest was louder than my voice. Days passed. He stopped touching me, stopped saying, "I love you." He started staying late at work. When I asked where he had been, he said I was being paranoid. When I cried, he said pregnancy was making me dramatic. When I asked if he was happy, he said, "What does it matter now?" I was invisible again. But this time, I wasn't alone. There was a child growing inside me. A child that hadn't asked to be part of this. A child that deserved more than a silent home. And a mother who cried in secret. As the weeks went by, the changes became impossible to ignore. My body ached. My emotions swung like a pendulum. I missed my mother's hands, her soup, her soft voice saying, "Vai ficar tudo bem." I missed the comfort of being seen, of being loved, of being more than just tolerated. One evening, while folding laundry, I noticed something strange. A receipt in John's jeans pocket. It was from a hotel in another city. The date was from the previous weekend. He had told me he was working overtime. I didn't ask right away. I waited, observed, collected little pieces. The text messages he never let me see. The sudden trips. The locked drawer in his desk. Then, the phone call. It came late at night when he was in the shower. The screen lit up and a woman's name I didn't recognize popped up. I didn't answer. I just stared at the name and let the phone ring. But the next day, I called the number back. A woman answered. Her voice soft, American, casual. When I asked who she was, she paused. "Who's this?" she asked. I said, "I'm John's wife." Silence. Then she laughed. Not because it was funny, but because it wasn't. She said, "That's interesting, because I am too." My knees buckled. I had to sit down. She told me about their 2 kids, about the house they shared in a different state, about how John traveled a lot for work, but was always a good father, always present, always loyal. I couldn't breathe. When he came home that evening, I confronted him. I expected denial, rage, excuses, but he just looked at me, shrugged, and said, "You weren't supposed to find out like this." Like it was a ruined surprise party. He didn't apologize. He didn't explain. He simply said, "This was never meant to be permanent. You were just supposed to be quiet." That night, I sat on the kitchen floor for hours, hugging my belly, feeling my baby move for the first time. I whispered promises into the darkness that I would protect this child, that I would never let them feel what I felt. Now, disposable, used, forgotten. The days that followed were a blur. John avoided me entirely. When we passed each other in the hallway, it was like 2 strangers brushing shoulders in a cold street. He spoke only when necessary. No more love notes. No more smiles. Just distance. Deliberate, cutting distance. One afternoon, I caught him packing a bag. He said he had to clear his head, that he'd be gone for a few days. When I asked where he was going, he said it didn't concern me. Before he walked out the door, he said something that still rings in my ears. "You're not staying in this country. Not with my child." I felt my blood turn to ice. Those words weren't frustration. They were a warning, and I didn't know yet, but that was the moment the real danger began. If this story is waking up something painful inside you, something you've tried to bury, know this. You are not weak for loving someone who turned cold. You are not to blame for believing in what felt real. Please, consider subscribing so we can keep sharing these voices that too often go unheard. And if you have the strength, leave a comment that simply says, "I remember the shift." You might help someone else feel less alone in the silence. He sat across from me at the kitchen table with the same calm he used to order his coffee, as if what he was about to say was just part of a regular Tuesday. I stared at him, heart pounding, still trying to make sense of what I had heard on the phone just days before. He took a sip of water, cleared his throat, and then it came out. Yes, he had a wife. Yes, he had 2 kids. Yes, he had a life in another state, a real one. One that had birthdays and school pickups and Christmas photos by the fireplace. One that I was never meant to disturb. I asked him why. He shrugged, like it didn't require a reason, like I should have known. He told me that I was never the plan, that I was a backup, an experiment, something to distract him from the complications he had back home. He said I was easy, that I didn't question things, that I looked up to him in a way his wife never did, that I was grateful, that I needed him. And that was the point. He said he met women like me all the time, women from poor countries with big eyes and small dreams, women raised to serve, raised to stay, raised to think that being chosen by a white man from America was the closest thing to a miracle. And I just sat there frozen, trying not to cry in front of him, because if I cried, it would prove his point, that I was weak, that I couldn't survive without him. He leaned back in his chair and told me that now that I was pregnant, things were going to change. Not for him, for me. He said the child would stay with him, that he had already spoken to lawyers, that he was building a case, that I was unstable, foreign, dependent, that he could show I wasn't fit to raise a child in the United States. I asked him what he was talking about, that we hadn't even gone to court, that he had no proof, that I was the one abandoned, lied to, trapped. He smiled, that slow, terrifying smile. He said he had proof, messages, voicemails, screenshots, things taken out of context. He said he had friends, colleagues, a reputation in the community. And I had no job, no papers, no voice. He said, "They will believe me, not you." I wanted to scream, to throw something, to run, but I didn't, because deep inside, I knew he was right. In this country, I was a guest, and he was the homeowner. He left for work that morning like nothing had happened. He kissed my cheek, told me to rest, and reminded me to think carefully before doing anything stupid. I sat in that silence for hours, staring at the clock, listening to the house, the creak of the floorboards, the hum of the refrigerator. The world kept turning while mine had stopped. I looked at my reflection in the mirror. My face was pale, my eyes hollow, my body tired and round with life. I didn't recognize myself. I didn't see a woman. I saw a placeholder, a prop, a womb. And once that womb was no longer useful, I would be discarded like a broken tool. I started going through his drawers, not because I wanted revenge, but because I needed answers, clarity, proof that I wasn't going insane. I found photos, notes, receipts from romantic weekends in places he had never taken me, tickets to family amusement parks, handmade cards from his children. In one of the drawers was a small wooden box. Inside was a collection of jewelry, wedding rings, bracelets. None of them were mine. Some looked like they belonged to women far older than me. One had an inscription, "To M, always yours." That night, I couldn't sleep. I lay in bed and imagined my baby, what kind of father they would have, what kind of home they would be raised in if he got what he wanted. I imagined my child growing up in a house built on secrets, on lies, on control. And then I made a promise, out loud, in the dark, that no matter what happened to me, I would not let him win. That this child would not grow up learning to fear love, that I would find a way, even if I had nothing left, even if the world didn't believe me, even if I had to leave everything behind. Because sometimes survival is not quiet. Sometimes it is defiant. Sometimes it is a mother whispering into the night, "You will not take this from me." If you are still watching and you've ever had to choose between your dignity and your safety, I see you. If you've been forced into silence because speaking meant losing everything, you are not alone. Please consider subscribing to this channel. These stories are heavy, but they carry truth. And if this one touched you, leave a comment that says, "I refuse to disappear." Let's remind each other that even in the darkest rooms, our voices still echo. It started with a call, one I didn't hear, one I wasn't meant to hear. I was in the kitchen, washing dishes slowly, letting the warm water calm my nerves. My belly had grown. The baby was starting to kick. Life inside me, despite the death of everything else. I heard his voice from the living room. Low, careful, too careful. He wasn't talking like a husband. He was talking like a man arranging something. I turned off the tap and leaned against the wall. "I've done everything you asked," he said. "She has no idea." My stomach twisted. He ended the call quickly, then walked in like nothing happened, kissed my forehead, told me to pack a small bag, said we were taking a short trip to the coast before the baby came. A baby moon, he called it, to relax, to reconnect. But the bag had to be small, he said, just essentials. We would leave early in the morning. I didn't sleep that night. I couldn't. Something was wrong. He watched me pack. He stood in the doorway like a guard. He even helped fold my clothes, smiling, soft voice, making jokes about the beach. But there was something cold behind his eyes, like he was already saying goodbye. The next morning, he told me to wear something nice, said he wanted us to take photos at the airport, that it would be good for memories. I hesitated. He insisted. And so I did what I had learned to do. I nodded. We got in the car, and he played soft music. He even brought me coffee, said he knew I liked it with cinnamon. He held my hand at red lights. He looked at me like we were newlyweds again. But I noticed he kept checking his phone. He typed messages quietly, too quickly. When we arrived at the airport, I realized something strange. He wasn't carrying a bag, only I was. I asked about it. He smiled, said he packed light, that everything we needed was already arranged at the hotel. I felt the first real jolt of fear then. My hands started to sweat. As we walked toward the check-in counter, I saw two men in uniform waiting near the desk. One of them glanced at me, then looked at John. They nodded. He squeezed my hand and whispered, "Just stay calm." Before I could ask what was happening, one of the men approached. "Ma'am, we need to see your documents." I froze. They had my name. They had my picture. They had the exact time I would arrive. They were not surprised to see me. John stepped back. He didn't speak for me. He didn't ask questions. He didn't even pretend to be confused. He just watched. I handed them my visa papers, already knowing it was useless. They looked at each other, then at me. "Your visa has expired. You're being held for immigration review," one of them said. I turned to John, mouth open, tears rising. He looked down at his phone, and then he cried. He covered his face, pretended to sob. The officers told me they had received an anonymous tip that someone had reported me as overstaying, as a risk. I wanted to scream that I was pregnant, that he was the father, that I had nowhere to go. But my voice cracked, and he didn't speak a word. They led me away, through cold corridors, past glass walls and travelers who didn't know my name. I could hear my heart beating in my ears. I could feel the baby squirm inside me, reacting to my panic. They took me to a small room, no windows, a metal chair, a table with nothing on it. The air smelled like bleach and cold metal. They left me there for hours. No food, no answers, just silence and the sound of a fan in the ceiling. Eventually, a female officer came in. She asked me questions in a slow, careful tone. When did I arrive? Who brought me here? Did I know my visa had expired? Had I applied for renewal? I told her everything. About John, about the wedding plans, about the baby. I even begged her to call him, to ask him to explain. She stared at me like I was a puzzle with missing pieces. When she left the room, I waited for the sound of her return. Instead, 2 other officers came in with paperwork. I was being processed for deportation. No warning, no trial, no chance to gather my things. I asked about my child, about the father, about the house I had lived in for almost a year. They said, "That's not our department." They said, "You'll be given a chance to appeal." But there was no one left to appeal to. I was allowed to make one call. I called John. He didn't answer. I called again. Still nothing. The officers watched me closely. On the 3rd attempt, someone answered. But it wasn't him. It was a woman. She spoke calmly. She said, "John can't come to the phone." I asked who she was. She said, "His wife." Then she hung up. I collapsed on the floor. That was the moment I knew. There was no accident, no misunderstanding. He had planned this, step by step, lie by lie. He never intended for me to stay. He just wanted me gone before the baby arrived. Because if the baby was born on American soil, it would be a citizen, and I would have rights. So he cut me off just in time. If you are hearing this and your heart is racing like mine was in that metal room, please know that your story matters. If someone has ever used your trust as a weapon, your love as a tool, I want you to leave a comment that says, "They will not erase me." And if you believe more people need to hear these truths, hit subscribe. Not because I asked, but because every time you do, it sends a message that no one's story disappears just because it was inconvenient. I was held in a room that felt like the last stop before erasure. The lights above flickered each time someone walked by the door, even though no one ever spoke. My heart thudded as loudly as a drum in a silent crowd. I clutched my belly, feeling the flutter of the baby inside, a small proof of life that they couldn't take away. But fear had already taken root. The walls smelled of bleach and metal. The chair I sat in burned my thighs through my jeans. The clock on the wall ticked and my mind multiplied the seconds by 10. They said my visa had expired. The words landed like stones. I thought about the day I boarded that plane, the one where he held me in his arms and whispered, "Welcome home, home." That word mocked me now, because I was home, and I was being torn out. The officers escorted me down a corridor where the other travelers glanced at me like I was the only thing wrong with their journey. One man tucked his daughter's hand into his and stared straight ahead. I wished I could slip into his life for a moment, safe, unnoticed. They separated me from the concept of woman, of mother, of wife. They remade me into a number, an alien, a detainee. I was cuffed, hand and feet, though they said it was. Standard procedure. Standard. I closed my eyes and pretended I couldn't hear the clink of the cuffs, the shuffle of uniformed boots, the muffled sob of another woman 2 cells down. I told myself the baby wouldn't remember this, but I felt every cold tile underfoot, every stinging fluorescent light, every inch of my dignity slipping away. When they walked me down one set of stairs, then up another, I asked a guard if I could call someone. He said yes, but limited time. I dialed his number and, it rang and rang. Then a woman answered. She said, "John can't come to the phone." I said, "Who is this?" She said, "His wife." I ended the call. The phone still held our last texts. "I love you," from him. "Can't wait to see you," from him. A month later, those words were costume jewelry. Pretty, worthless. I was pregnant. I was detained. And I was told the father would have custody. It sounds almost too cruel to believe, but I heard the lawyer's name he was giving. I heard him talk about instability, about foreign dependence, about how American courts won't believe a woman who came in on a visa if the father claims she's unfit. Real and raw, the numbers show that pregnant detainees have been mistreated, denied care, shackled, even though a federal investigation and rights groups say this happens despite policy against it. 19news.org, +3, The Guardian, +3, American Civil Liberties Union, +3. I lay on the hard bunk, wrapped in a thin blanket that smelled like someone else's body odor. The neon clock glowed 2:13 a.m. I thought of my mother in Brazil, her call I had ignored hours ago because I was waiting for the right time. What moment? The moment my life collapsed? Sometimes I squeezed my belly, talked to the baby. "You're safe," I said. A lie, maybe, but the only one I could find in the dark. Food came once. A tray with a rubbery chicken patty and soggy vegetables. I pushed it aside. I couldn't eat. I thought of how I once made rice from scratch, simmered beans in a pot, and served it with love. Now a tray that felt like an insult. I told myself, it is not the food that matters, but the message. They were treating me like I didn't matter. Another officer asked if I needed medical attention. I said I felt dizzy. "Do you want to see a nurse?" he asked. I said yes. They told me to sign a form. I asked if I could keep a copy. He said no. I waited 3 hours. Someone lugged in a plastic wheelchair and tucked me into it. I saw my reflection in the vinyl, my shirt tight, around my belly. I looked like a prisoner and a mother, both definitions undone. The sun came up and it was too bright for my eyes. They moved me again, to an intake room. Another form, another number, and then the realization they were processing me, not protecting me. Just another case file, another expulsion to mark. The baby inside felt the shift. I felt it. A small kick, fear or protest, perhaps both. When the door closed behind me and the officer said, "You may wait outside the cell," I caught my breath. I stood in the hallway staring at the garnish of travel posters. "Explore America. Your journey begins here," mocking me. I thought that the journey ended here. I thought of the airport, how he cried, how the phone buzzed. I thought of the suitcase I carried, full of borrowed clothes and borrowed hope. It landed on the conveyor belt like last year's dresses. If you are hearing this and your breath caught, like mine did that morning, know you are seen. If someone ever left you, thinking your home was the gift and you were the burden, please comment, "Home is not pain." And if you think this channel should keep telling what happens when love becomes strategy, then subscribe. Your story matters. I felt the world tilt beneath me the moment I discovered the betrayal, not just from a husband, but from a friend I never suspected, the woman I had trusted, the neighbor I greeted every morning with a shy smile, the one who held my hand on lonely days. She was part of the machinery that dismantled my life. Her name is Valeria, a fellow Latina, the kind of person who laughed with me in broken English and borrowed sugar when I baked cookies. I thought we were allies in a world that didn't value us. I was wrong. It started with little things. She knew the exact moment I would leave the house because she asked casual questions over coffee about my visa status, about my plans, about my husband's business trip. I mentioned once that John had told me not to drive while pregnant. She raised an eyebrow and nodded slowly. I trusted her silence too, because I didn't know there were parts of the house I wasn't allowed to inspect. One evening, I found her in the laundry room, holding my husband's jeans. He was out. She told me she was dropping off a donation bag for a shelter. She smiled congenially as I passed her, but inside, I felt a tremor of unease. The scent of detergent and baby clothes hung in the air. I watched as she shoved the jeans back into the hamper before I could ask a question. Later, when I searched through his drawers, I found digital photos sent to her phone, screenshots of my messages, photographs of me crying silently in the hallway, and GPS logs of when I left the house. All her doing. She had the spare key. She took the coffee from his hand when he got home and whispered updates in Spanish. She told him I was different now, quiet, obedient. The word obedient filled me with shame that I didn't know how to name yet. She wasn't just a witness. She was the accomplice, a translator of my fear into something used against me. I remember the night she knocked on my door while he was away for business. "Are you okay?" she asked softly. Her voice was warm, but her eyes were calculating. I said I was fine. I told her I had just had a bad dream. She offered to stay. I let her. She brought ginger tea and a blanket. I told her I trusted her. She asked quietly, "Do you really believe he will stay by your side?" My chest tightened. I didn't know how to answer, because I didn't know the truth yet. And then she stopped visiting. She blocked my calls. She refused my coffee offers. One day she appeared at his house instead, staying late, laughing with his co-workers as if she belonged. When I asked him why she was there, he said she was helping with the situation. I asked what situation. He said nothing, and I believed the nothing. Anger built in me like swollen water behind a broken dam. I thought the betrayal of the love I trusted was the worst injury, but betrayal by a friend, someone I let into my silence, cut deeper, because it meant I had no safe corner in the world I had entered. I realized one day that I hadn't spoken in my native language with another Latina in months, that our tiny community of women, the ones who ate tamales together after church, who laughed at babies' videos on social media, had shrunk. I had pulled away at his suggestion, "So we don't raise suspicion," he said. Valeria had gone away, too. She joined the circle of other women he entertained. They winked at each other in the kitchen while I washed dishes and pretended not to know. One evening I found her leaving the house, carrying 2 grocery bags. One had my name in smeared marker. I followed her quietly to her car. She got in. He joined her 5 minutes later. They left together. A short drive, a stop at the office parking lot, a quick transfer of envelopes from her bag to his glove compartment. I saw it from the window and froze. Inside me the baby kicked. A protest or a warning, I don't know. But in that moment I knew I was not imagining things. The puzzle pieces I had ignored were fitting together into a pattern I didn't want to believe. That night I opened my phone and typed "help," then deleted it. I sent a text to my mother in Brazil. She asked why I was crying. I lied. I said I was just tired. She didn't know that trust was nothing but a word in my world now. I lay awake listening to the hum of the fridge, the soft tick of the bedroom clock, and the weight of her betrayal pressed like cement on my chest. If your story echoes mine, even faintly, know that you're not alone. If someone in your life promised safety and then gave you silence, leave a comment saying, "Silence betrayed me." And if your heart still beats despite the fear, subscribe and share. Because every voice that rises from the shadows pushes one more lie into the light. I returned to Brazil like someone expelled from a place they once called home, carrying nothing but a suitcase of borrowed clothes and a heart full of broken promises. Arriving at the airport, I felt every eye on me, some curious, some pitying, most indifferent. I walked through customs with my belly swelling, the baby's kicks reminding me I still carried hope inside of me, even though hope seemed like the cruelest thing of all. My mother embraced me, kissed my forehead, and whispered that now I would be safe. I lied when I said yes, but I felt the lie settle in my chest like a stone. In my hometown, the walls seemed smaller, the air heavier. I tried to pretend the life in the US had been just a chapter, not a trap. I cooked rice and beans like I used to, cleaned the kitchen, and tried to reconnect with my sisters who asked how the wedding was, how the baby was, how America had treated me. I said what I thought they wanted to hear. I smiled. I nodded. But inside, I was unraveling. I didn't tell them about the nights I cried in a shower, about how I whispered to the baby that I was sorry for bringing them into this. I didn't tell them about the suitcase on the conveyor belt at the airport in America, how the scanner beeped and they opened it and he stood beside me and cried as if he was losing something too. I didn't tell them about how he answered a phone at immigration and smiled once more before they took me away. That detail stayed inside me. The lawyer in Brazil listened patiently when I walked into her office after months of silence. She asked about the baby, asked about the husband, asked about the documents. I told her everything I could remember. The ring, the photo, the milk I craved, the locked drawer, the phone call, the airport. The lawyer's face didn't change, but I felt the weight of her gaze. She said I might have a case, that maybe I could challenge the green card fraud, that maybe, just maybe, I might get a chance at something I didn't even know I still wanted, justice. While waiting, I visited the beach where I used to laugh with him, where he told me we would have our home by the sea. I sat on the sand, traced circles with my fingers in the wet grains, and thought about the life that was meant for us. The waves came in and out, relentless, I realized I had been trying to hold on to someone who drifted away while I stood still in the shallows. One night, I hugged my belly as the baby kicked, stronger this time. I told them about the beach. I told them they wouldn't remember this place, in Brazil, and I promised I would give them new memories. I promised I would turn this story into something they could be proud of. I promised I would survive. Because survival isn't just breathing. It's claiming your worth. It's saying your name out loud when someone tries to erase it. If you are out there watching and you feel like you've been sent away without reason, know that you're not alone. If someone ever told you you would be fine and then left you stranded, leave a comment that says, "I came back because I'm still here." And if you believe that no story should end with silence, subscribe and join us. I found a lifeline in the form of a lawyer who didn't flinch when I told my story. She sat across from me in a small office, the walls lined with books and certificates, the hum of the air conditioner filling the quiet. She listened without interruption as I described everything, every lie, every secret phone call, every small betrayal that had built into a cage around me. When I finished, she leaned back in her chair and said, "We can fight this. Not everyone believes the story they are told. There is a system, and we can use it." That word, system, felt strange, like a door I hadn't realized existed. She explained that in the United States, there were laws designed to protect victims of fraud, especially immigrants misled through marriage. She spoke about the Visa U, about fraud claims, about ways to document his behavior, and about how many women like me had started small, but ended up changing the outcome for themselves and their children. I felt a spark, fragile but alive. We gathered everything: emails, screenshots, receipts, photos, flight itineraries, each piece a small dagger, a way to prove what I had lived through. She told me about other women in similar situations, women who had been silenced for months or even years before speaking out. Some had lost everything, but some had reclaimed their lives through courtrooms and hearings. The thought that my story could matter, that it could tip the scales, felt heavier than I could bear. I was terrified, and yet for the first time, I felt a trace of hope. The process was slow. The letters, the calls, the back and forth with attorneys in a country thousands of miles away. Each step was a battle against time, against bureaucracy, against someone who had designed my life to fail before I even knew the rules. But I kept pushing. I could not allow fear to decide for me anymore. I had survived the airport, the detention center, the cold judgment in his eyes. I could survive this too. We reached out to journalists who specialized in immigration fraud. I wrote down everything in detail, my own voice trembling on the page. My story, the truth of what had happened, began to spread quietly at first, through emails, private messages, online forums. Then slowly, it caught attention. A few articles mentioned the case anonymously. Then, one journalist published an in-depth piece about how some immigrants were exploited through marriage, highlighting my story. I watched the reactions online, comments of disbelief, of sorrow, of empathy. Some said they had experienced similar situations. Some were learning for the first time that such tactics existed. I realized my pain could serve as a warning, a shield, a guide. The FBI became involved after repeated reports of similar schemes tied to him. It was surreal to hear that the same man who had orchestrated every part of my suffering was now being scrutinized. Every detail I had recorded, every message saved, became part of a larger investigation. The system I had once believed would never protect me was moving, slowly, deliberately, toward justice. And yet, the biggest challenge remained: my child. The court proceedings were complex. He had presented a facade, a narrative that painted me as unstable and foreign. But armed with evidence, legal advice, and support networks, I could start dismantling the story he had constructed. The lawyers in the United States guided me on how to file a motion for custody, how to prove my capacity and fitness as a mother. I learned about parental rights, about documenting care, about how even a small detail like medical records could tilt the balance. Every time I sat at my laptop, filling out forms, sending emails, or organizing evidence, I could feel my confidence returning. Piece by piece, my voice reclaimed space it had never been allowed. Piece by piece, I realized that survival is not just enduring. It is acting, speaking, and refusing to be invisible. The law is slow, tedious, and often indifferent, but it is a tool I can wield if I am determined enough. This chapter has taught me that even in the darkest corners, there is potential for light. Even in the silence forced upon you, speaking out can reverberate beyond your own experience. I have met other women, survivors, who remind me that strength can be communal, that voices united can overcome what seems insurmountable, alone. And though I still face uncertainty, I am armed with knowledge, evidence, and a network of allies who refuse to let injustice pass quietly. If you are listening, and you have ever been silenced by someone you trusted, know that your voice can still matter. Please subscribe to this channel to follow stories of courage that illuminate truths people wish to hide. And if your heart resonates with my journey, leave a comment saying, "I will be heard." Your voice can ignite courage in someone who believes they are powerless. Today, I speak not only for myself, but for every woman who has been silenced, discarded, or used as a pawn in someone else's life. I have learned that survival is not just about breathing or enduring. It is about reclaiming your story, your identity, and your voice. After months of struggle, legal battles, and nights spent cradling my child in a small room in Brazil, I have begun to rebuild a life that is mine, fully mine, without someone else controlling the narrative. The journey has been painful. I have carried the weight of betrayal from the person I thought I would love forever, and from the people I trusted to support me. I have felt the hollow ache of isolation in a foreign land, the cold machinery of a system that did not see me, and the crushing reality of losing the first moments of my child's life. Every day, I face the choice between despair and courage, between silence and speaking out, between giving up and continuing to fight for a future where I could exist as both a mother and a woman. I started sharing my story because I realized that my pain could transform into something powerful. By speaking openly, I could warn, educate, and inspire others. Each word I have written, each video shared, each legal step documented is part of reclaiming my voice and turning suffering into purpose. I want every woman who watches to know that even when it feels like no one is listening, your story is valid, your feelings are real, and your voice matters more than you can imagine. When you speak, even softly at first, the world hears you more than you think. The child I now hold, even though separated from me for months, represents hope and resilience. Every kick, every flutter, every small movement reminds me that life continues despite cruelty, despite betrayal, despite fear. I have found a quiet strength in motherhood, in knowing that I am responsible, not only for my survival, but for nurturing a being who will inherit courage from my example. And in this, I see the possibility of redemption, not only for myself, but for the countless others whose voices have been muted. I have also learned that connection is vital. I am no longer isolated. I am part of a community of survivors, lawyers, advocates, and storytellers who remind me daily that no one must face injustice alone. We share strategies, hope, and small victories. And each story shared, each testimony recorded, strengthens the chain of awareness that protects others. What I thought was personal pain has become a collective force, a light piercing through the darkness. I reflect often on the path that led me here, the hope, the betrayal, the silence, and now, the reclamation. I remember his eyes, calm and calculating, his words that once cut me like knives, and the system he manipulated to control and expel me. But I also remember the phone calls from friends and strangers who believed me, the lawyers who guided me, the journalists who told my story, and the strength I did not know I possessed. Each step, no matter how small, brought me closer to reclaiming my life, my dignity, and my agency. And so I continue, not because the past is forgotten, but because the future demands it. I continue to share, to speak, and to create. This channel, these stories, are my way of giving back. They are proof that even in the bleakest circumstances, courage persists. Even when voices are drowned, they can rise again. Even when hope seems distant, it can be nurtured into reality. I am living proof that survival is not passive. It is active. It is defiant. It is beautiful. To everyone watching, I want to thank you from the bottom of my heart for being here, for listening, for believing that stories like mine matter. Your presence honors every struggle that came before mine and strengthens the voices that will rise after. If you have felt fear, silence, or betrayal, know that you are not alone. If you have survived in any form, know that you are part of a continuum of strength and resilience that cannot be broken. Please consider subscribing to this channel to continue witnessing these stories of survival, courage, and truth. Your subscription is more than a click. It is a commitment to remembering, to honoring, and to empowering. And when the next video appears on your screen, I invite you to click it and immerse yourself in another story that will move you, challenge you, and remind you that human resilience is infinite. Thank you for staying until the end. Thank you for believing. And thank you for letting these words, this journey, this testimony, become a small part of your world. Remember, no voice is too small to be heard, no story too painful to be shared, and no life too fragile to become a source of strength. Today, I am here, and tomorrow, together, we will continue to rise.